For nearly 60 years, clients have returned to Jetcraft because of our proven results in aircraft sales, acquisitions and trades. Our team of experts span the globe, providing local insight for every stage of your transaction. We have one of the largest and most diverse inventories in the industry, and with our worldwide network and industry connections, we are the difference between getting an aircraft and getting your aircraft.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whether you're in Napa, Toronto, Chicago, the Isle of Wight, Dublin, Boston, or Queensland, Australia, or Malta. Welcome to the Corporate Jet Investor Town Hall. This issue, we're going to focus on the summer of charter, and we've got 6 fantastic guests who are going to be taking us through this. First up, delighted to have Greg Johnson, President and CEO of Tivoli, joining us. Tivoli is a charter payments organization. Greg is also a complete data, I was going to say geek, but that's not wrong, data doctor, expert. Greg, how are you?
I'm doing well, Al.
Great to see you. So, Greg, what's going on?
Well, besides the fact that my dog is going nuts in the background there. Apologies for that. The industry right now is, boy, that's right on cue. Industry is really seeing some unprecedented volume right now. When I look at the, where we're at versus 2019 and the data that we trend, we're trending up as an industry in the U.S. by more than 20% year over year, which is a kind of year-over-year growth that we've really never seen. We've sort of forgotten 2020 in terms of what we look at from a baseline standpoint. But if we consider 2019 the baseline, we're up between 25 and 30% depending on the segment of the market in the U.S., and that's just incredible.
Is it simple what's driving this, or do you think we've seen a fundamental shift?
I think it's a fundamental shift, and I think it's long-term. I think that, there's been a sort of change in psychology, in society based on people that we're talking to that is driving a lot of this. We have, in terms of things that I've seen anecdotally talking to both customers and companies, we're seeing people value time with family more. We're seeing a lot more sort of family reunions, and in many cases, we're seeing the private jet experience be extended, beyond their immediate family to sort of siblings and in-laws and more extended family. So if there's a sort of a wealthy component of a larger group, they're saying, hey, we're all flying privately now and we're getting together more often. I've heard of cases where families have actually relocated to different towns and cities so that they can be closer together. I think that's a real thing. And once you've up and sort of moved, that's not changing overnight. Beyond that, I think we're seeing, with the technology we have today, including things like we're doing here, the ability to sort of choose when and where we travel is transforming things. So it's not that we aren't going to travel for business, but we're going to be very sort of selective and strategic about it, and that means that where we're traveling to and from is I think going to change. We have a lot more people that I've seen that are choosing to work from different locations and not for the short term, for the long term. I talk to a lot of folks in tech, and a lot of tech companies are saying we can't recruit people if we are going to force them to come back into an office 9 to 5 Monday through Friday anymore. So I think there's a fundamental shift that's happened, and I think the final thing that I would say on that front is I think that there's this term out there, YOLO, you only live once, and I think people are sort of placing that you only live once, our mortality a little more on the front lines, and I'm hearing people are saying, hey, whether it's somebody that's super high net worth or the guy down the street, that bucket list is a little more important than it used to be, and people are sort of changing their priorities, and they're moving up things that matter. And one of those things is, if you had the money to fly privately, you sort of did it during the lockdown out of safety. You're now saying, you know what, I'm going to keep doing that because it's better. I can afford it, and I'm only going to be on this planet for a short period of time. I'm not going to waste my time. So I think all of those things come together to say we got a long-term positive trend here.
So it's a long-term positive consumer trend.
Yeah,
we're seeing individuals and families. What about business?
Well, business is coming back too. I mean, when we look at the Part 91 travel, which is really a better indicator of business travel than, say, charter, that trend is above 2019 as well, and sort of significantly above. So we're seeing, travel on the sort of the corporate side is returning, to normal or above normal, but the patterns are different, right? The airports where we're seeing that travel have changed, and I don't think that's. I mean, it's a similar pattern. We're seeing corporations where their executives are more remote than they used to be, and that's part of the reason that we're seeing more travel. They're flying to and from, a location where they used to commute by car in order to get into the office for key strategic meetings or to meet with other people in other places. So I think that will continue as well. I mean, we're seeing, again, it's double-digit year-over-year growth compared to 2019.
Yeah, the 2020, it's not even worth comparing with.
No, I mean, if you want to see triple digit or super high double digit, look at 2020. But I think that's, in many cases, I think when we look at history, they're going to say, 2020 is the lost year. And, we just sort of skipped from 2019 to a new reality in 2021. And that's what we're seeing. And there's a lot of interesting new challenges that we as an industry are facing now from this, sort of exponential growth.
You've had a nice comment from Frank Yannick going, YOLO, amen.
Yeah.
One thing we've seen in the past is that the US tends to be busiest around March. The spring tends to be the period for the US, while in Europe, it's very much the summer. Are you seeing any signs of that changing?
Well, I think it's too early to say, because I think, certainly we normally see a drop in the summer, and we're seeing just the opposite here. But I think it's being influenced more because of these sort of macro level changes than anything else. There's a part of me that says, looking at the data, this could be the new soft baseline, and this fall could actually be quite a bit higher, right? I mean, we still know, I know, plenty of companies that aren't traveling like they used to. So I would say that while business travel is back and is above what it used to be, I think there's still a potential for there to be more. So, I think it's too early to say. For sure, but it does not feel like we're at the peak of demand here, and that summer is now going to become a new peak. It feels like there's just a whole new set of dynamics going on, and it's a little too early to tell exactly how it's all going to play out. But it's certainly looking, positive from a volume standpoint for the long term.
So your long-term forecast is you only live once. The growth is coming.
I think so. I don't think we've seen the peak is basically the way that I would say that. Now, if there's one cautionary word, I would say a lot of this is fueled by psychology. And if there is one thing that drives the sort of the headspace of the people that are traveling privately, it's the financial markets. So if we want this, ride to continue, we need the financial markets to continue to perform the way they're performing. And I think, there could be a clear reversal and pretty sharply if that trend fell off. So I think we have to sort of, knock on wood, cross our fingers or whatever on that front, because, folks that are new to the industry, if the markets took a steep decline, would probably be the very first to sort of bail out. And we have to be cautious about that.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Thanks very much, Greg Johnson, President and CEO of Tivoli. Now, let's stick in the States. Delighted to have Anthony Tivnan, President of Magellan Jets. Magellan or Magellan, depending how. You do Magellan, don't you?
I love the way you say it, but I do pronounce it Magellan.
It's tomato. Magellan. Anthony, you're saying... Yeah, record charter, record demand for people for jet cards. What's life like at the moment?
It's very hectic at the moment, Alistair. It's it's really been a big shift, I would say, for us. really since November. After November of 2020, we really started to see the consumer market come back strong. The writing was certainly on the wall in terms of what the summer ahead of us was after March, when we saw record levels of March that surpassed 2019 numbers substantially. And we certainly predicted June. Historically, June is a very strong month in terms of flight activity and overall sales for our business. And June of 2021 surpassed, we saw over 100% growth in flight activity June of 2021 versus 2019, which at the time 2019 was a record year. So certainly a lot of the points that Greg hit on, we're certainly seeing the same. I agree. It's certainly fueled on emotion, and that's causing a lot larger purchases. We're seeing accounts that are increasing where they might have taken two trips over the summer, and they're taking 2 to 3 trips a month to really, reconnect and grab hold of some of those experiences that we've all missed out on for the last 18 months.
What about pricing and availability? Is it getting harder to find lift?
Yeah, absolutely. With the surge that we're all seeing, pricing is, for the business side, pricing is really impacted in 2 ways. Obviously, there's going to be some impact to the consumer, but for all of us running our businesses, it's certainly increasing our costs, not just on our purchasing cost, which is one thing, and depending upon your model internally of how you procure aircraft, it's certainly going to depend on that. But even just the efficiency of our colleagues and our staff, where procuring an aircraft may have taken 30 minutes pre-pandemic, just based on the availability. We see 2 or 3 people working on the same allotment of trips, securing tail numbers, and that's really hurting our efficiency and productivity cost per head internally. So it's kind of shaping both ways. And for our jet card and our membership business, our pricing is fixed to the consumer. And so while our pricing is fixed and we're seeing market prices that are certainly increasing a bit, but also our productivity costs are going up. So that's a little bit challenging, which really doesn't hold the same amount of weight on our on-demand business because we're not locked into a fixed price. So that's all really just, whatever the market's bearing is what we're providing. And we're just providing a lot more consulting these days. You have this new segment of customers, and going in for a lot of these folks coming into the market at its current state right now can certainly be a little bit scary, probably a little bit frustrating at times because the pricing is up. The aircraft are not lasting very long on the market, so they need to make quick decisions. So it's certainly an interesting dichotomy for these users that are now coming into the industry.
I've lost you briefly.
I can still hear you. Do you have me?
I'm just going to check.
I can hear you.
I hear you. Sorry, I think it may be me that lost you. I'm sorry.
Yep.
One of the things we've seen is NetJets have said they're going to stop light jet sales, and partly because of the reasons you talked about, they're getting concerned about fulfilling demand. Have you considered this? And and what options are you considering to weather the supply storm?
Sure. Magellan Jets is absolutely not considering. We have no intention of pausing any of our jet card programs, our membership programs at all. From a business perspective, what NetJets did, I think, is really, really smart business. Their core competency is really that fractional customer, And all of us, through times like this, have to take a look at our business and really make sure that we're focusing on our core competencies and what really drives our overall revenue and margin and net profit. So for them, they've made a very wise choice to make sure that they're focusing on their core customer. For Magellan Jets, this has been our business model for the last 20 years, procuring and the relationships with the wholesale market, putting planes on dedication. This is our business model. It's our only business model, and serving those customers who want jet card programs, membership programs, on-demand charter. That is exactly our core competency. So while certainly, I'd be foolish to say it's not more challenging these days. The business model that we have, fortunately, allows us to make pivots, stay lean, and weather storms like this. So it's interesting. It was kind of the example I kind of thought through in my head was, NetJets isn't chasing squirrels. They're staying focused on their core competency. And a lot of us, right? I'm sure even some of the folks on the panel and in the room today, when the JetSmarter craze was happening, I had customers asking me if I was going to jump on that bandwagon. I had some of my own colleagues asking me if I was going to jump on that bandwagon. And, I'd be lying if I said the consideration wasn't there, but that wasn't my core competency. And that wasn't my core customer. So, staying kind of true to your business model, is certainly important in times like this because, nobody wants to lose that because things will change. Availability certainly will open up. I'm sure there's going to be some wholesalers that enter into the space and take advantage of this opportunity, right? Because there's a consumer opportunity, but obviously there's a huge wholesale opportunity right now, as there's been some consolidation in the business. So, for us, we're staying true to our business model.
Do you are you planning to raise prices for your jet cards?
Little early to tell right now.
Okay.
If I could raise prices today, we probably would. But again, it's I don't want to overreact. I guess I have some of the same views as Greg in terms of the long term. However, I think there's some considerations and some pivots and some relationships on the procurement side. It's always not a point of do you have to sell higher. A lot of times it's can you buy smarter, can you buy lower. So we're certainly considering both of those options right now.
So what's your prediction for the next 3 months and then till the end of the year?
Sure. I think Greg hit the nail on the head with some of his predictions, and he's certainly has a nice broad perspective from an industry view. My view is certainly what I'm seeing in our own business and speaking with our own customers. But I think the growth is going to sustain. I think it will continue to increase. I think there will be more market share to grab from this business class, first class, millionaire next door travelers, which we saw an unbelievable surge of those folks enter into the market. I do believe there'll be a second wave. I think it's interesting in terms of the business travel. From that perspective, a lot of these new customers own businesses, and I think that will also have an impact on business travel, where now they're starting to see the efficiencies, and they'll probably end up using private aviation for some of the business stuff as well. We're seeing business travel come back, just like Greg mentioned on the 91 side. So, I think the surge isn't over. The availability crunch is certainly not over. November, December is going to be a very telling 60 to 75 days this year. Very interesting. So, we're preparing for that now. So we're really looking at, probably Q2 of 2022 for us to kind of reset. But we're making a lot of these purchasing decisions now.
That's awesome. That's really good. I've got a question from Terry Spruce. What percentage of new customers are you seeing now? Because you've had a fantastic year. You've brought in many. Are you still seeing new news, or are you seeing people who came in last year or in the last 6 months coming back again?
Yeah, so our reorder percentage has continued to increase over the last 18 months. We are seeing new accounts continue to enter in. It's still surprising me. I love scrolling through the surveys that come back, and I'll just handpick some and just read them and try to get a pulse on what's going on. And it still amazes me that today we're still seeing first time flying private, so happy to be members. So that's those are some of the things that I'm seeing in our business, where I do believe that the surge isn't over. None of us, here today have captured this, the entire new segment. It's still going to continue. First class travel. I traveled first class to LA last week. It was terrible. The prices were higher. I had a mask, and I'm in Boston, and we've been maskless, and we go to gyms, and we have very a pretty good way of life, and vaccination rates are extremely high. So it was, I paid more than I have ever paid. I had less service than I probably have ever had, and the experience was terrible. The infrastructure at the airports aren't ready to support the surge, so lines are longer. And so I certainly, I think, everybody should really saddle up, and I think new client acquisition is going to be something that we're all going to enjoy, certainly through the end of the year.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for joining us. That was brilliant. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cheers, Gracie. Anthony Tiven, president of Magellan Jets. And now we're delighted to switch to Sweden, from Boston to Sweden, to Harry Clarke, head of insight and analytics at Avinode. Avinode needs no introduction. Neither does Harry. He's also got a very clear job title and spends all day looking at the data when you're not wild swimming.
Yeah.
Harry, we've talked about the States. Do you want to take us through what demand we're seeing in the rest of the world?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about just how good things seem to be going in demand in the States. In Europe, it's kind of not quite at that level, I think it's fair to say, but it's certainly climbing pretty rapidly at the moment. Europe is kind of opening up for travel, and when we look in our system and see the trips that people are requesting into the future, we can see that is kind of continuing over the summer. Typically in Europe, when we look at the Avinode data, we tend to have a really high July peak, extremely seasonal. Last year, that peak was really shifted kind of sideways on my graph, but later in reality to August. And we're kind of seeing that return to back where it should be in July really this year. So it'll be interesting to see if, we kind of have a long summer through into August, or if it does just kind of stay for July this year.
Roughly how much is it behind 2019 in Europe at the moment?
2019. So I think I'm just looking at my data right now. Kind of we're ahead of 2019 in terms of the trip requests that we see through Avinode, but kind of single digit amounts really. But it's interesting seeing the mix change for the European market as well. Throughout this whole pandemic, we've kind of had lots of, different markets turn up. We had a Cyprus wave, we had a Montenegro, Turkey was very popular for a period, and kind of looking at it now, it's really all about Greece, it feels, this summer. That's really, has so much more demand than it certainly did last year. And just kind of the regular places where we see people go to usually kind of claiming back their position, it kind of looks like, as you go through July and into August. So, the south of France, from the Middle East, it's Greece, it's the south of France. From Russia, people are starting to inquire about the south of France again. Whereas, in the pandemic, it was kind of more, where can we go where we don't normally go?
And the US, you just concur with everything we've heard before?
I mean, very much concur. I pulled out one stat. It was looking at our data for the next 13 weeks. Vegas was up 174% on last year. So that triple digits that Greg talked about, certainly true.
Even though they're running out of water in the Hoover Dam. What about intercontinental trips and transatlantic? Is that market still very quiet?
Yeah, so that's still pretty quiet. We're seeing a few more kind of inquiries around Europe to the US, but it's kind of similar to what we were really seeing in the height of 2020. So it certainly feels like that's not really, that wave of kind of global travel isn't really there yet. Throughout 2020, we saw an awful lot of demand intercontinentally, to Asia, etc., from people looking, kind of evacuations out of, wherever the local hotspot was. This year that's really looks to be a bit calmer now. So the regular global travel that we're used to seeing, at least from the Avinode perspective, is not really coming back at this point.
Is your gut feeling that we're going to see pent up business travel, businesses wanting to get back out and see suppliers or customers?
I mean, I would expect so. I mean, everyone on this call probably feels the same, that they want to do that. So, events are being planned. I'm sure that will return. I guess it's just a matter of time. For now, very much, at least on the charter side, it looks like leisure is really, we're in quite a wave of leisure travel at the moment.
And your thoughts on pricing?
Yeah, so that really, we look at the data, what people are quoting in the Avinode marketplace, and we aggregate it up to get an overall trend. And of course, back at the start of the pandemic, I've never seen a line fall off a cliff quite so much as it did. In the US, it's really kind of reversing now, that trend. It kind of fell very sharply and went back up, and now the gradient of that line is really very positive. So now in the US, when I was looking this morning, actually, the pricing is at pre-pandemic levels, which, given all we're talking about, the constraint of supply, is kind of interesting that it's not grown really much higher. Although the gradient of that line would suggest that it's certainly going to. On the European side, we're still kind of a couple of percent below the peak that we got to last summer in Europe. And when you compare back to 2019 in Europe, we're still 6-7% below where we were on the pricing peak for July 2019. So it's still a fair bit of recovery on the European side in terms of the pricing from what we see.
So you talk to operators all the time. One of the big complaints is that pricing levels haven't really gone up over the last 10 years. And some would argue over the last 20 years. Do you think this in the US, we're going to see a shift where pricing, there's 5,000 aircraft in the States available for charter on Part 145. Do you think we're going to see them running out, or are we just going to see and we're going to see pricing go up significantly in the next 12 months before the spring peak?
I mean, if the predictions are correct around, this hasn't peaked yet and it's just going to go higher and higher, it must. As I say, that line of what the pricing looks like now is just going up and up. And, supply, we look in our system and, we've got a hell of a lot of good leads coming through. But, it's harder for people to fulfill those because, people are so busy. So in that scenario, surely, the charter prices will just continue to rise.
That's awesome. And I guess your forecast for the rest of the year is hard, but what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, from the charter perspective and kind of more on the leisure side, it's all looking very, very positive. I'm generally quite a cautious person, so I'd probably rate a bit more caution around. I think there probably will be a little bit of a bump, but I go along with the general viewpoint that a lot of people have changed their travel behavior, and I think some of this big increase we've seen will be here to stay.
Brilliant, Harry. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That was Harry Clarke from Avinode Group. We're now going to switch to Portugal. Greg was earlier talking about people who've taken advantage of the pandemic and have moved. Nick Imrie has left London as his role of co-founder of I&W Aviation and set up the Portugal office. Nick, how are you?
Yeah, doing great. Enjoying the sunshine down here.
Yeah, you're looking tanned, annoyingly tanned and relaxed.
Missed the flooding in London a couple of days ago.
I know you're missing a great summer here. Are you just relaxing? Is there anything going on in
Yeah, I moved down here to relax and just have better meals and enjoy the sunshine and drink beer all the time. And as soon as I've moved down here, we've kind of gone into our summer peak, and things are extremely busy right now. It really feels like stepping back in time, kind of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when things were really busy. I find we're kind of back at that kind of volume, but also kind of back to some of the challenges which I'd kind of forgotten about that I thought weren't challenges about. So trying to get slots in Ibiza. We had a challenge a couple of weeks ago where we had our slot allocation, 4-hour slot allocation for one of our clients going in, and that hasn't happened in a long time. Really kind of evidence that demand is back. So it's business is very, very, very strong, and our clients are flying a lot at the moment.
So you were at NetJets during the boom, and then you and Emily set up this really interesting business where you consult people on whether to own a fraction of a card or do on-demand charter.
Exactly, yeah. And sometimes the answer can be you can do all of them, and we help you with that. So, and one of the things that I think we advised our customers really well on was, earlier this year, actually, we introduced a lot of new clients to NetJets, for example, and VistaJet, JetFly. They had particularly good deals going on. We thought it was good to take advantage of that. It can be a good resource to have a NetJets jet card in your back pocket as one of the solutions in your portfolio of flying. And now we're finding that as things are getting really busier, that it can be very advantageous to be able to flick into a NetJets, for example, when the trip is right.
Would you rather be a buyer of jet cards than a seller of jet cards at the moment? Because it's tough, isn't it? And they did a great job, but you've sold your jet card based on years of pricing, and it's not happening in the US, in Europe yet, but in the US we're seeing there must be a lot
absolutely.
of
And we're finding actually that I think, across the board, we're seeing our charter pricing is going up, what we're finding in the market. So we're seeing availability is going down, pricing is going up. It's harder to get availability with good charter companies. And that's when I think, companies like NetJets and VistaJet, come into their own, where you can kind of tap into that guaranteed availability. You've got a contracted rate that you bought in at. And more now we find that our clients are leaning into some of the kind of the program providers, because they want the guaranteed availability when it's in short supply, and more often not now, actually, those companies, whereas they might have been a premium price before, actually at the kind of peak times, actually they price very competitively. And I think that's reflective of why, for example, you've heard that NetJets have stopped selling their light jet cards, and I think that's reflective is actually, that there's a real demand for their services right now because of that.
Sorry, Nick, I lost you for a second there. Do you are you confident that the summer is going to get pushed on, like Harry says? Do you think there's a chance that will happen like last year?
Yeah, so I think August is usually quieter, in Europe anyways. I expect that'll be the same. I think I actually agreed, that I think there'll be a second wave. So I think this is the first wave, and I think there'll be a second wave for a couple of reasons. One is, in our business anyways, we've grown this year, but what we've really grown is our flying per customer is probably down, but we have many more customers. And so we've grown our client book by 25 or 30% this year. And so, so there's a lot of new entrants into the market. And I think actually those clients will start flying more. We've already seen that clients that we took on a small contract, last year, have come up for renewal before the year is up, and they're starting to pace through their hours, and pacing is increasing. So I think that'll be one factor. The second factor is that I haven't seen a really strong return to business travel yet. So it's predominantly leisure travel now. And I think that's still coming. We're seeing anecdotal evidence of that. We've got a couple of corporates that are starting to fly more. We have one UK PLC whose flying is up tenfold, whereas it was predominantly the CEOs the group CEO's usage. It's now being the rest of the board are being allowed to use it, and also country CEOs are being allowed to use this kind of service because it's a kind of practical way of getting around. And I think actually maybe as we come out of the summer, I think more European companies will move towards that, and that the business travel will come back. So I think that second wave is coming.
Which is great for operators. European operators always have this, the summer's not been fantastic this year. They've had awful springs, and so they could actually have a decent autumn and winter.
Yep, I'd hope so. And I think there's, as I said, our anecdotal experience, anyways, has been that the pricing is recovering and coming up, much faster. So, I guess that that's going to be good news for operators as well. So, because I think pricing has been so depressed in Europe as well for so many years that they could make some gains here. Not so good for the customer, but it will be good for operators.
Are you worried about your long-term customers who've got used to getting an aircraft whenever they want one at the last minute, a decent aircraft at a decent price?
Yeah, so actually it's, part of our challenge in this as well has been trying to educate our customers about how you can, perhaps changing some of your behavior. It's much harder now kind of the day before. We're working on a couple of flights for tomorrow, and we're having real challenges finding availability of good charter for 2 trips tomorrow, and pricing that's high. There may not be companies that we necessarily have a track record with, especially while things are so busy. It's more important than ever that we want to work with a small crop of charter operators that we have very strong relationships with, where we know our customers are going to get looked after, where the quality and the safety that are there. Customers may have to book with more notice to make sure that we can look after them in that way, and book with them, so that the planning can help. I've also had to tell customers about airports being busy again, right? You may not be able to get the slots that you want. We have one client that's flying to Ibiza on Sunday. They haven't determined their departure time yet. They're flying on a Global 6000. We know that it's difficult to get availability and parking at Ibiza. I'm having to have those conversations, which I haven't had in a couple of years now, saying you have to do that. You have to decide this. We've got to get the parking and the slot requests in, because otherwise you're not going to get what you want. There's other challenging airports like Mykonos, which are I think you pretty much get told the day before when you're going to be able to land and take off, and it doesn't matter what you really ask for. And I'm having to have those conversations with customers, which I've not had to have for a couple of years now. So as I said, it's kind of taking me back.
So you've been in the industry a long time. Is your long-term forecast as positive as everyone else's? Or do you think this is just a wave and we're going to have this is such a depressing question to ask.
Yeah.
But
no, it is. It's positive. And I think I've been on a journey with it myself. I think obviously, last year when the first lockdown happened and the first wave of COVID, I wasn't as positive as everyone else about the outlooks for our industry. I was more optimistic through the summer, but the numbers show it in terms of our customer numbers, the flying, and everyone's experience in the industry. And the comments that I get from customers, I'm very optimistic actually that private business aviation is going to do very well for the long term.
That's brilliant, Nick. I'm just checking it, the questions, and so finally, if you had to sum up European business aviation in one word, what would you go for?
Hectic.
Great. I'm going to let you go and find those 2 charters. Nick, thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you. Just a shame you're in Portugal now, not in London. Thanks, Nick. That's Nick Imrie, co-founder of I&W Aviation. We're interspersing a lot of qualitative and quantitative. You can't talk about aircraft utilization without turning to Richard Coe of Wings. If you're trying to Google him, it's Wing X. You Google. Richard, how are you in Switzerland?
I'm doing all right, Al. How are you doing?
Very well. What are you seeing at the moment?
I thought that the most interesting thing that we saw through the first half of 21 was that activity just surpassing the first half of 2019 as we came through the end of June. And I can tell you that through the first 13 days of this month, certainly if we look at the US, which is by far the strongest market, BizJet sectors are up by 28% compared to the same days in July 2019. So that's a pretty impressive bump that we're seeing coming through July. And in fact, the Independence Day holiday sectors were up by 44% over those days, 21 versus 19.
So what's great is everyone's agreeing today. We've got the qualitative or the individual businesses like Gollan, which are going crazy. You're seeing it going crazy. What about supply? There aren't that many aircraft, are there, that to cope with this level of demand that are on 135?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And in fact, of course, there's a kind of macro question we got with the whole economy. When are we going to start seeing supply side problems and inflation coming through and the whole kind of growth story derailing quite possibly? But when it comes to our little sector, yeah, there's limited supply. I mean, we're tracking very closely the utilization of aircraft in the 135 market. It's really started to tick up in the last couple of months. It's now moving towards 50 hours a month. Now on an annual basis, that's absolutely minute compared to how fast commercial aircraft are moving during a year, but it's probably reaching towards a ceiling simply in terms of availability in the private jet market. And as that ceiling gets closer, it's going to get harder to procure the lift quickly. Prices are going to go up, and that could stall demand. So you've got some of the big players that are really looking to scale up now, and they're not going to get aircraft off the production line. They're going to try and do it through consolidation because they probably anticipate this coming, right? They'll see the squeeze and they'll just say, right, we've got to get the lift on board now.
Yeah, although even when you do that, part of the problem is pilots. It's not just the aircraft, is it? You need the pilots. You need to make sure you've got maintenance facilities and get the pressure as utilization grows. I completely get and I think we're seeing the consolidation where people are buying operators rather than buying aircraft, and OEMs can't deliver more. But I know the NetJets, part of their view is that the light jet market, their concern is not so much now. They can meet the demand now. They're worried about next spring in the States. Do you think do you see that and I think business travel coming back is quite good because that's what Tuesdays and Thursdays you can fill that slot, which is quite quiet. Are there any other concerns you've got that we might not be able to keep climbing?
Yeah, I mean, just to comment on that fact that there is a high concentration right now around the leisure market. I mean, and we can see that just through some indicators like how does weekend travel compared to weekday travel. We've seen weekend travel already surpassing 2019 some time ago, but weekday travel is still behind. So yeah, there is that slot because you've got much lower availability during those days, and I think that the market can grow a lot more there. You've also got the international sectors, which really haven't come back yet. Through the first half of this year, they were down 20% and versus 19. So as those international restrictions get lifted, that's a growth opportunity, albeit the availability has to be there, right? The aircraft have to be available.
So what's your forecast for the next year? You get a year.
Yeah, I think it's going to 6 months. Yeah, I think it's going to happen in phases, Al. I think that there's going to be, a big summer bump. I think that Europe will start to see, some of the growth that the US has seen. I don't think it's going to be as easy for Europe. There are all kinds of complications. I mean, first of all, lots of nation states have their own rules. But I think that there will be a strong bump through the summer. I think the interesting thing is what happens in Q4, because you probably got some, you got some headwinds and you got some accelerators. Accelerators in terms of the business travel coming back. You got headwinds in terms of, virus control, and of course, the economy might hit a wobble.
And long haul, are you confident that's going to come back as it did before? Or do you think patterns have changed?
Well, I think one of the big themes for us is what's going on in the scheduled market. What's the substitution effect? Because we made a big investment last year in terms of really broadening our analysis to everything that flies, not just the biz jet. And I think that's really paid off because during this crisis, what we've been doing is comparing like for like the frequency and availability of sectors, scheduled sectors, out of cities, and just seeing, how much that erosion is correlating to biz jet uplift. And we're really seeing the evidence that it is, that correlation is there. And I think what that speaks to is a long-term boost for our sector, given the likelihood of long-term erosion in scheduled connectivity.
And one of the things we've talked about a lot in the past is new personal travel, business, shared aircraft seats, corporate shuttles, private, holiday shuttles. Do you see that happening now, or do you just think that the limited supply will stifle innovation for a few years?
Yeah, it's going to take some time because the supply side has to be there. But I think that is, that's a secular change that was already on the way. It needed this as a kind of speed bump. But you've got these trends around technology, around digitalization. You've got the speed up in terms of consolidation to get these big players. Crucially, you've got the money coming into the industry, because I think, last 10, 15 years, one of the reasons we haven't moved faster is the market just hasn't been big enough. We haven't had the investment come in. Now the investment has come in. I think that we will see a big expansion of the sector. And I've been going on for ages that I really think it should be called, it's really about on-demand aviation, because you posit that next to scheduled aviation, supply-led aviation, which is now looking weak for the long term. And so I think, on-demand aviation, or even on-demand lift, is the kind of bigger space in which this sector can now move in the next few years.
And you don't see airlines bouncing back fast?
Yeah, I mean, they will come back. I mean, just to take an example, so far this year, scheduled airline sectors in the US are down 33%. They're down over 60% in Europe. But there is a bounce back. I mean, this month, just in the first fortnight, in the US, scheduled sectors are only 20% down. So they're coming back. But I mean, listen to what Anthony said earlier. I mean, that seems to chime with everything I'm hearing anecdotally. Traveling scheduled is just miserable.
To be fair, it always has been.
It's far more miserable now. We were just getting past those ridiculous 9/11 restrictions, weren't we? And now, oh dear, it's just, I'm not looking forward to it. Are you?
No. And on that depressing note, Richard Coe, co-founder of Wings, thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Al. Cheers. Bye.
Delighted to end now with Doug Gollan, founder of Private Jet Card Comparisons. If you want to know the difference between... Doug, how many jet cards do you cover? Oh, you're on mute a moment. Sorry, Doug, you're muted. I don't know if we can unmute you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi.
How many jet cards are you comparing at the moment?
We have over 60 companies and over 500 programs in the database.
500 jet card programs. If you want to know the difference between all of them, Doug Gollan is your man. Doug, how are you?
I'm great, Al. Thanks.
Great seeing you. You've been questioning your subscribers, your readers, this week. What have you learned from the traveling, the people who use jet cards to travel on?
Well, and so my subscribers are a mix, because I think, as other people said, people have multiple solutions. So 50% of them have more than one private aviation solution. Sometimes it's two different jet cards based on their needs, or they own a plane and then they also have jet cards for supplemental lift. But yeah, I did a survey back in January and did another one just for the beginning of this month. And it's just the same thing that everybody has been saying, tremendously. Well, I guess unless you're a kid of one of these people who are now spending money on private aviation, and maybe you'll inherit a little less. For everybody else, it's very good news. From this last little bit of research I did, it was divided into people who had been flying privately before COVID, and then also people who started because of the pandemic. And of the people who started because of the pandemic, we asked, post-pandemic, are you going to continue to fly privately on a regular basis, from time to time, or, after the pandemic, as the airlines come back and everything, are you going to stop? And, the question in the industry is always about the stickiness of private aviation. and 100% of the people, and this is over 100 people, 100% of the people who, can you hear me or can you see me, Al?
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm losing you. So you keep going. I think everyone else can hear you.
100% of the people who were new to private aviation said they're going to continue, and of those people, 53% said that they're going to continue regularly. And so one of the interesting points of that was when I asked the same question back in January, it was about 40%. So there's a significant increase in the number of people who had started flying privately because of the pandemic, who, now said, yeah, it's not just going to be time to time, it's going to be on a regular basis. And then, two interesting points, because, some people, they started and they're just doing the charter and things like that. About 80% of the new people had bought jet cards. 18% of those new flyers to private aviation who had started flying because of the pandemic have already renewed or, made another deposit. They went through their initial hours. And, I think, you talk about, are these people dipping their toe in the water? The average deposit for these new flyers was over $200,000. So, they're not just, one flight here or one flight there. They're getting into it in a meaningful way. So that's good news. And then the second part, which is more good news, and I do have a little bit of bad news, I think, or at least some, I'll end my thing on a little bit of a cautionary note. But the second part was, those people who were flying privately prior to the pandemic, 40% of them say that they're going to be flying more post-pandemic privately than they were before the pandemic. About 55% said, it'd be about the same, and only 3% said less. So I think if you look at future demand, just what everybody said, as business travel comes back, as people just get used to flying privately. On the news here in America, every night you see more things about, rage in the airplanes and things like that. And, people just don't want to mess with it. So that's all the good news. And then I'd just say the cautionary part, I asked, because of everything that's going on, the surge in demand over the last couple months, have you experienced any service issues? And 20% of respondents said, who've flown in the last few months, said that there had been some type of service issue. Most of it was like a 2 to 3 hour delay. But when I asked about satisfaction, are you satisfied with your providers? The satisfaction level of people who had experienced some type of a service hiccup was significantly lower. And so, I talk to subscribers on a day-to-day basis. And, I think, I try and tell them that the grass isn't always greener. These planes break down. But I think, obviously, Anthony and anyone who's in the jet card or charter business or share business knows that it's much harder to get a customer, than to keep a customer. And, these are successful, wealthy people. And I think, some of the feedback I get is, they talk to their sales rep and they were told, blah, blah, blah. But I think this is something, the cautionary note is, maybe at the CEO or senior level, to really, hone in on people who've had service issues and, reach out to them personally and give the explanation, because you've got basically a CEO or a business owner, or, again, these are, a C-level type, people who have the money to do this. And, they want, when something goes wrong, I think they understand. But I think, a little bit of that, a CEO level attention for reach out, could go a long way to just, make sure that they stick with you as a customer. So, that's, overall, I'd say great news for the industry. It looks like a very, it looks like demand is going to continue strongly.
60 providers of jet cards. Some of them are newer. Some of them have grown enormously fast. They've sold jet cards a year ago based on pricing a year ago, which is less than now, and on availability a year ago, which was greater than it is now. Are you worried that some of them may struggle? Some of them, NetJets is concerned about March, which is why they've stopped selling. Do you think customer satisfaction is going to get worse?
Well, I think it's an issue. I mean, everyone I talk to is saying the same things as Anthony. Harder to source aircraft, taking more time. When I looked at tracking jet card rates at the beginning of June, they were higher than December, but obviously the FET kicked back in. If I looked back to December 2019, the jet card rates generally hadn't gone up. I'm starting to see, some companies, increase rates. There are other, sort of stealth ways that people increase rates. They, increase the daily minimum from 60 minutes to 90 minutes or 90 minutes to 120. So it's a de facto increase. But yeah, I mean, there's a small boutique provider down here in Florida, and he told me he's 4-person shop. He just doesn't have the manpower. What Anthony said, 2 or 3 people now sourcing, an aircraft that used to take one person 30 minutes. And he put a hold on it just because he doesn't have any, enough help to, source the aircraft. And then I think what Nick was saying is, you want to work with providers that you have a relationship with, that you trust. That they're going to, you have to, if there's a mechanical, you have to have a recovery plan in place, because most fixed rate jet cards, they guarantee recovery at no additional cost to the customer. And so, yeah, there's a lot of strain on the system. I think the sales top line, all of this stuff is good, but, it's going to be an operational challenge. And so that's why I go back to, what I was saying with the people who said they had some type of service issue. I've had more subscribers, tell me about service issues they've had in the last 6 weeks than I've had in 5 years. And so I don't know that the companies are necessarily set up to to deal with people who've had delays and, problems, because generally, private aviation, it's a dream. You get to the plane, you fly, you get there, there's no issues. So, I would say that is probably some type of a concern.
It's a great question from Robert Baltus from the European Business Aviation Association. Do jet card providers without a fleet have the most difficulties going forward?
Oh, I think that's a great question. A lot of the jet card providers that have fleets, they're on fleet, off fleet. So, XO has the XO Jet and the Red Wing and the Talon fleet, but they're selling off fleet. Wheels Up has 350 planes, but they use another 1,200 aircraft. I think, if you look at NetJets, and I think Anthony sort of, honed in on it, when people buy into NetJets, they do go off fleet, obviously, on peak demand days, but, people buy into NetJets because they want to buy, they want to fly on a NetJets operated aircraft. And so people who are selling programs like that are probably more constrained versus a broker program or, a Wheels Up or an XO type program, which is on and off fleet. Because, when you go on to Wheels Up, you're not necessarily going to fly on one of their operators. So I think it's probably, the fractional providers that are really selling that experience of you're going to fly on, or, a VistaJet, with the silver planes and the white glove service. If you're booking a VistaJet plane, VistaJet, you want to see a VistaJet aircraft show up. So those are the folks who are probably a little bit more constrained, but maybe that's also why Thomas ordered, another dozen Global 7500s, right?
Brilliant. Doug, thanks so much for joining us. Doug Gollan, Private Jet Card Comparisons. Thanks so much for joining us all. I'm Alistair White. That was the Corporate Jet Investor Town Hall. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much.
For nearly 60 years, clients have returned to Jetcraft because of our proven results in aircraft sales, acquisitions and trades. Our team of experts span the globe, providing local insight for every stage of your transaction. We have one of the largest and most diverse inventories in the industry. And with our worldwide network and industry connections, we are the difference between getting an aircraft and getting your aircraft.